Good evening. The Charter Township of Plymouth Board of Trustees special meeting for Tuesday, March 3rd, 2020 will come to order. Mr. Clerk, please take the roll.
Trustee Heitman.
Here.
Trustee Dempsey is excused. Clerk Forba here. Trustee Dorshevitz.
Here.
Trustee Kermy.
Here.
Treasurer Clinton.
Here.
Supervisor Heisey.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Next is item B, Pledge of Allegiance. Jackie Peters, would you like to start us off? Thank you. Item C is the approval of the agenda. Need a
Mr.
motion,
Supervisor.
Mr. Clerk?
I move the approval of the agenda for Tuesday, March 3rd, 2020.
Motion's made by Clerk Vorba. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Trustee Heitman. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Next is item D, approval of the consent agenda. Any comments or questions from the board? Hearing none, I need a motion to approve. Mr.
Supervisor.
Heitman?
I move we approve the consent agenda as written.
Motion made by Trustee Heitman. Is there a second?
Second.
By Clerk Vorba. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Next is item F1. This is a presentation recognizing the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment and the formation of the League of Women Voters. I think the entire League of Women Voters is here, so no, okay. So just the Plymouth Township people, that's good. Well, whoever wants to come forward and say a few words, that would be great. And then I do have a small proclamation here for you as well.
Well, good evening. My name is Paula Bowman. I'm a Plymouth Township resident and also the president of the Northwest Wayne County League, and Plymouth Township is within our service area. On behalf of the League of Women Voters, we're grateful for your good wishes on the League's 100th birthday, and especially for the opportunity to call attention to the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment. Many of us here probably had grandmothers or great-grandmothers who could remember their complete disenfranchisement from participating in a government that created and enforced laws about them. Since before the Civil War, women and men have organized, marched, protested, lobbied, and have even gone to jail in a collective fight for voting rights for women. We can be proud that Michigan gave women the right to vote in 1917 and was one of the first states to ratify the 19th Amendment in 1919. This was not a cakewalk, however. The 1917 vote was preceded by two unsuccessful attempts to change Michigan's Constitution in 1850 and in 1867, and three different petition drives to bring women's suffrage to the state legislature were ignored. Legislature wouldn't even call for a vote. But eventually, equality prevailed, and women did win the right to vote in 1920. The League of Women Voters was organized as a result of the passage of the 19th Amendment, and its main purpose then was providing candidate and issue information to the 50% of the population that had not voted before. Over the 10 decades of our existence, the League of Women Voters has applied the lessons learned in our earliest days to engage and empower all voters. As we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the League and the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment, we are reminded that government of the people, by the people, and for the people cannot function without active involvement of the people. This is the year to remember the struggles of our ancestors who fought for the right to vote for all citizens. This is the year to increase Michigan's voter turnout from the embarrassingly low rate of 63% in 2016. This is the year to realize that thanks to the passage of Proposal 3 in 2018, voter registration and no reason absentee ballots have made it more convenient than ever to exercise the privilege of voting. This is the year to realize that there is more power at the ballot box than complaining on social media. Voting in Michigan is more accessible than it has ever been. We know we can count on the board to join the League of Women Voters to urge all of Michigan's registered voters to make our democracy stronger and more complete by voting. Thank you.
Thank you. thank you very much and for that presentation and on the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. I have, in recognition of that and the League of Women Voters, a proclamation I'd like to present to you at this time. I'm not going to read it all, don't worry, but there you go, and you can certainly put that into the collection of all of the other communities in Western Wayne County. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
All right, thank you. So we're going to move along now. This is item F2, the Special Assessment District Policy and Procedures Update. We have a couple changes to what you have in your agenda, and I'm going to start with Kevin Bennett, and then we'll go over to Treasurer Clinton. So Kevin, you want to start us off?
At the last meeting, the board discussed some proposed changes to the special assessment procedures publication. I implemented those procedures. One thing I'd like to point out to the board is that with respect to section R in the proposed changes, I added the following sentence pursuant to the board's directive. The sentence is, in general, no specific method of apportioning the cost of an improvement is required, except that the method selected must be fair, just, equal, and in proportion to the benefits conferred. I cited the case of Dixon Group versus Novi. I spoke with Jack Dempsey today. He sent me an email and we talked on the phone a couple of times about the case of Dixon versus Novi. And his opinion, and I concur with his opinion after hearing his rationale, was that the term equal as used in this context may be misleading. It could be construed that the term equal means that the apportionments of the units within the district should all be equal in amount. That is not what was contemplated by the Dixon case. What was contemplated by the Dixon case is that the assessments must bear a rough equality, not a dollar for dollar, but some measure of similarity between the amount of the assessment paid and the increase in value of the property. So for that reason, it was his opinion, and again, I concur with his opinion, that we remove the term equal from section R.
Okay.
Otherwise, I think we discussed all the other changes.
Why remove it? Doesn't it say in that case? Didn't you cite that sentence from that case?
Yes, what the Dixon court, what they used that term equal for was in the context of the ratio of the increase in value of the property to the amount of the assessment charged to that property owner.
Those things have to equal out.
Yes, they have, not dollar for dollar, but they have to be roughly, there's got to be a similarity there. But in the context that we were talking last week with respect to apportioning the assessment, whether it should be equal among all units or if it should be done on a case-by-case basis, the term equal as used in here could be confusing. And I think it would be better than rewording the whole thing, just remove that word equal. And so it will say that the method selected must be fair, just, and in proportion to the benefits conferred.
Okay. I don't have a problem with that. I would just, from a style standpoint, before you cite Dixon Road Group v. Novi, could we put C, the word C?
Sure.
S-E-E?
Yes.
That way it does not give the impression that you are quoting directly from the case, but you are asking the individual to refer to that case for additional information.
I think that's proper also.
Fair enough?
Yes.
Okay.
Just delete the reference to the case and use the words.
That's a discretionary consideration for the board.
Highly unusual to put cases in ordinances.
Well, I don't,
I've
it's
never
not,
heard of it.
It's just not high, it's not, from a legal standpoint, it's not highly unusual. It really is, and in fact, it helps it helps explain our legislative intent, and it also gives anybody who's looking to challenge it an immediate reference on why we think we're right. So it's not
I don't have-
unusual, and it's not an ordinance. This is a
resolution.
This is a policy.
It's a resolution supporting the policy.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have a problem leaving it in it. I'm still kind of troubled with the whole concept. Really kind of struggled with it a lot.
Yeah. Kevin, was that your only change? I thought there was something else.
Yeah, there was one other change, I believe, in,
It was not a substantive thing. I think it was.
it was just a deletion of maybe 4 words, and I can find that for you if you want to hear the exact part of it.
Just random.
You
words.
deleted 4 words under what section?
Just random.
No, not random.
Random.
It was something else that could be misread.
Well, Kevin, why don't we come back to that?
Okay.
Mark, do you want to walk us through your proposed change?
Yeah, thank you, Ed. Excuse me. At last week's meeting, when we were discussing this topic, I suggested as long as we were revisiting policies and procedures related to SADs, that we should revisit how we're billing our residents who are paying for the SADs. As a matter of precedent, we've always just offered them a 10-year payment term at the 4% rate of interest. And I expressed a concern that that's a long time to be basically for the township to be acting as the bank for people who are getting their roads repaired. So I didn't have a great suggestion. I wanted to think about it, and a couple days later, I came up with this suggestion and how we might address this. I'm still open to suggestions, other comments, but this is what I came up with. So the paragraph R that Kevin had modified, if you take a look at this packet that I handed out, I'd like to add to that paragraph R the following text. The property owners will be offered 3 options for payment of their apportioned cost. Number 1, pay the entire assessment up front. Number 2, pay the assessment over 5 years at the current federal prime rate of interest. And number 3, pay the assessment over 10 years at the current federal prime rate of interest plus 2%. What I'm trying to do is to basically disincent people from choosing option 3, which is where we basically are acting as the bank for a period of 10 years. Yeah. I've also added a couple other pages in here just to give you a sense for what the prime rate of interest is. It's funny because I had these things printed up this morning, and then the feds changed the rate this morning. So it was 4.75%, and later today it dropped down to 4.25%. So that's the most current rate of interest you're ever going to see within the last couple of hours. And then the last sheet is just gives you a historic perspective over the last 30 years what the federal prime rate of interest has done. It just kind of, I think this gives a little bit of credence to my concern that when it comes to the prime rate of interest, 10 years is a long time. And if you're offering somebody a 4% rate of interest, the prime rate of interest could jump up to 6-8% over a period of 10 years. So that's kind of my goal in trying to shrink as best we can that time frame that people are going to pay back. So the prime rate will, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Go ahead.
So the prime rate will fluctuate. Will that fluctuate on an annual basis? Will it fluctuate on a quarterly basis? My suggestion, that would be tough to implement. My suggestion would be if somebody signs up for an SAD today, we would lock them in at 4.25, and they pay 4.25 for the next 5 years. Whatever the prime rate of interest is as the day you've closed the SAD would be what they pay. Okay.
So I agree with the concept, because we don't want to be the Bank of Plymouth Township where we're the best rate in town.
Mm-hmm.
But so to disincentivize people to do that, but we still have a vehicle for them to be able to finance it if they can't afford to pay the money up front, and that's the point.
True. Or they can always
Or choose.
get a home equity loan or something like that. right, and pay for it themselves. But we're giving them an option to do it through Plymouth Township.
Right.
So I have a lot of questions and concerns about this, Mark. Though, under number 1, pay the entire assessment up front. That'll deceive people because we don't pay for SADs up front. It's after the job is signed off by the engineer.
It should say that, actually.
So this will confuse everybody because people will think they'll have to come up with the money. And they'll never sign the SAD if they think they have to come up with the money before the job is done.
Well,
So
yeah,
they could be deceived by this, and even no matter what you tell them, they're going to say, I don't believe you, because in writing it says up front.
It should say when the project is completed or something along those lines.
okay. Yeah.
So we need to work on those words. And then, one, I don't think Plymouth Township can borrow at the very low rate of prime. And second is, and neither can any resident. A resident, this will have the opposite effect, because a resident will say, great, I can borrow money at prime rate, because you and I can, no one in this room can borrow at prime rate. The Dearborn Federal Credit Union used to be prime for a home equity of prime plus 2. Now, I don't, they may have changed it, but this is going to have the opposite effect. Everybody's going to take the deal because no one can borrow at that rate.
Yeah, but now
Well,
you
we've been
borrow at
offering 4% forever.
Right. No, it isn't. We went to 4% just before the election year of 2016. Before that, it was 8 for 2 decades. 8.
I don't know. I got some SADs in our system. That
Well, I can show you what it was 8. I know it was 8. In fact, Ron Edwards didn't want 8, and we wrestled with him. And then he finally got lucky in 2015. They lowered it to 4 to make it attractive or more attractive. So my concern is number 2 is going to have the opposite effect. And then number 3, that's still a good deal. Why don't you keep it simple and just make a rate that's sufficiently high to disincentivize people from
because if
using us as the bank?
If you set the rate at 6% and we have a period of high inflation, then that would even incentivize them more to take the financing. If interest rates went up to 8 or 9 or 10% like they were in the early 90s, and it's locked in at 4, everyone is going to take it, or 4.5 or 6.
Well, I'm pretty sure everyone will take number 2 right
That
now
could be.
and for the foreseeable future, because
That could be. I mean, you might be right on that. But the concept is to not. I mean, I agree with the concept, which is to not fix a rate right now because we're trying to predict the future, and that never works out.
so the number 2 should have prime rate plus something.
Something.
And then plus 4 for the number 3?
Because number 2, anyone will take that deal. You cannot get that deal for a home equity loan,
I don't.
and you can't
don't
get it
believe
for a
that's true.
credit card interest is 20%, and even a personal loan.
Because the problem is there could be an economic downturn where what would happen is the town in a lot of SADs in the period before that. So what would happen is the township has so much money loaned out, and we're in an economic downturn. So now the township's got to turn around and borrow money to pay its bills.
Right. That's why we
the
don't
risk.
want to incentivize financing. And I wouldn't go to 10 years. Go to 5. Think about that, or shorten it, because you're really
10's a long time.
you're playing craps with interest rates. And if you get a squeeze, then the township has to, for cash management, has to go and borrow money at higher rates, but they have a couple million in SADs that is affecting their ability to borrow, maybe.
Or
maybe.
10 million.
Part of my thought process here was to not make it extremely impactful. Right now, we're offering 4% for 10 years. The prime rate today is 4.25, so that's not significantly different. And I wanted to offer, like we have in the past, a 10-year repayment. You know, I'm looking at, just as an example, I'm looking for people like at Litchfield who are going to be paying around $25,000. 5 years that's still $5,000 a year. That's still a hefty chunk. And if you spread that out over 10 years, well, now you're closer to 2,500, 2,800 with interest, something along those lines. So, you know, I don't want to do this on a case-by-case basis. I want to keep it fairly simple, but not make it as dramatically different as what we've had in the past.
Yeah, that's
My thought
true.
process.
That, with interest, that would be $450, $435 a month. That's a lot of money to spread it over 5 years. Litchfield.
So could you live with number 2, prime plus 2, and number 3, prime plus 4?
I will do whatever the board wants to do.
I like the idea of, you got to put some pressure in the system to make us not the bank.
Well, and we've got a lot of SADs coming up. And we got a lot
Now,
of money that's
remember-
gonna sit in the bank of,
Remember, we front the
Remember
money
that
for the-
every SAD that we've talked to already, that we've kind of already floated the concept of 4% for 10 years.
But you're not
True.
committed. Those SADs have not been approved. Some of them are not. So we're not committed to that 4.
No, I get
not
it, and that's why in this policy statement I put it where I did, which is when it comes time in the process where you're apportioning the costs, right? That's at that time is when you're locking them into that particular rate of interest.
So, but a 4% loan or 4.25 right now, especially people who have, say, $10,000 of credit card debt, this is a deal. This is a way to reduce your risk, your interest rate charges for the family budget. So,
So for item 2, you want to look at pay the assessment over 5 years at the current federal prime rate of interest plus 2, and then the other one would be 10 years plus federal plus 4? Is that what I'm hearing?
I can certainly live with that. That makes
yeah, I want something, this right now, number 2, all day long, people are going to take this financing from Plymouth Township. It's going to have the opposite effect.
Well, I'm not sure. You can't predict. When we did the 4 assessments in 2016, we had 4 different SADs, and I gave people one of 2 options. The first option was pay it up front. The second option was 4% at 10 years. We had over 50% of the people pay up front.
They were not that expensive SADs, though.
They weren't. I mean, some of them.
They were
you're
all
right,
under
they're
10
not,
grand.
They're not Litchfield. Yeah.
We're not talking a $20,000, $25,000 SAD.
Yep. That's absolutely true.
Are there any, Kevin, are there any limits to how much we can charge interest?
Yes. What the statute states is if the township has any bonds outstanding, it's 1% above the average rate of interest borne by the bonds. If there are no bonds outstanding, then the maximum interest rate is 8% per annum.
If we have
So we'd have
bonds
to cap it.
outstanding.
That's why we used to have 8 in the old days before we went to 4.
So under this scenario, right now, it'd be 4.25 plus 4, that'd be 8.25
So we'd have to cap it
at 8.
not to exceed 8%. But what, I'm confused about this bond
Bond
issue,
thing.
though. I mean, what's bond for SADs, bonds for fire engines, what? I
Bond,
mean,
any bond we have.
I
That's
can read
scary because
this.
the bonds could be 2 or 3% right now.
What the statute reads is, all unpaid installments prior to the transfer to the township tax rolls provided this act shall bear interest payable annually on each installment due date at a rate to be set by the township board not exceeding 1% above the average rate of interest borne by special assessment bonds issued by the township in anticipation of all or part of the unpaid installments, or not exceeding 1% of the average rate of interest borne by bonds issued by a county, drainage district, or authority, which wouldn't apply to the township in this case, if the unpaid installments are to be applied to the payment of a contract obligation of the township to the county or authority, or to the payment of an assessment obligation of the township to the drainage district.
So,
So what,
so I think what that says, so if we issued bonds to pay for Litchfield, then, yeah, right, which makes sense.
Because we're not supposed to be in the profit
Yeah.
business. Right.
But we're
Right.
borrowing money instead
Right,
from a bank.
right. But we
our
issued
financials-
bonds to pay for Litchfield and 2 other ones. but we can charge what our cost of the bonds is plus 1%, because we
And
should,
this said 8% is the maximum?
that's what it said.
So it's
do we-
simple, just put everything back to 8% then?
That's
No.
not just what it
No?
says.
Can we cap it at
We
8%?
could, but I don't
Not
know
to
that
exceed?
everybody wants to do that.
Not to exceed
Yeah, you don't
8%?
wanna
Well, Jerry's
gouge.
laid out a scenario where it could be 8.25.
I just want to protect protect the township, but we certainly don't want to gouge.
So what's your pleasure?
Just
Keep it
cite-
simple.
Cite the law.
Keep it simple. No, don't
No,
cite
not
the
to
law.
exceed 8.
Make it simple.
Not to
Not to
exceed.
exceed 8, and number 3.
Or-
All of them have to be not,
Or all of them, yeah.
Or
have
make
to
the
be-
5-year plus 2 and the 10-year plus 3 not to exceed 8, or I don't know,
Yeah.
somewhere in
So
there.
never to exceed.
So for item 2, it would be plus 2. So we're looking at plus 2 for item 2,
Not to exceed 8
right, for both.
for both of them.
That's funny, the statute caps it at 8.
Well, what do you do if you have like 1982 when the prime rate was about 15%?
Exactly,
You go to the legislature and ask them to change the law.
which
so
they
I w-
do from time to time.
So
Because
I-
that statutory, sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt,
that's okay.
I think that 8% applies to, it's a number that applies to things like when you have to pay interest on a judgment, and that varies. They change that from time to time.
So again, so for item 2, it would be pay the assessment over 5 years at the current federal prime rate of interest plus 2%. And then for item 3, pay the assessment over 10 years at the current federal prime rate of interest plus 4%. In either case, not to exceed 8%.
Yes.
You're the maker.
I'm
Number
good.
1, what about the words on number 1?
Pay the entire
Changing the word
assessment.
upfront.
Pay the entire assessment in its totality, or upfront. The word upfront is.
Or is it
kinda-
when the invoice is issued? Let's talk about it so that it's precise.
Pay the entire assessment, I'm just putting right now, after the job is done.
Or
but-
at receipt of invoice?
Is there a...
We're going to
is
send
there
them an
a
invoice, right?
closing? Is there something that's the event?
Patrick, what is the milestone that triggers the payment due to the vendor? There's a milestone, right?
There is a milestone called substantial completion,
Yeah, that was what I was looking for.
and then there's closeout.
So
But
on
closeout could
substantial,
be a year.
on substantial,
No. Put it,
hang on,
an
on
invoice.
substantial
I heard-
completion, do they invoice us at that point, or is it on closeout? We should use the same language.
When do we
Tom.
start billing people normally? Substantial completion or closeout? Because I think closeout can happen much later.
Yeah, it's usually substantial completion is done prior to the winter, at the end of the construction season.
Yeah.
And then they get that first tax bill that comes that has the assessment. And then closeout can linger with the
Closeout can linger.
spring
We were dealing with
um,
closeouts.
corrections.
I think that's why you need
And
to say
substantial
invoice.
completion, more or less,
Our-
is
the
when that
invoice to
maintenance
the
bond
property
starts.
owner.
So,
When do we
That's-
have to pay?
That's when the treasurer
Because-
does it.
Because
Right.
we want
That's
it
when the money
due when we
starts.
have to pay.
well, we pay throughout the construction project.
Well, it should be,
pay
you know,
certificates.
substantial, at the end of the construction season, the first tax bill.
But they should
think you
have to
could-
pay
I
when
think you
we
could-
have to pay. Do we have to pay at substantial completion?
No, we paid,
Progress.
the
all the time.
contractor submits certificates throughout the construction
At
season.
certain milestones?
So how about
So there
this?
could be 4 or 5 pay certificates.
So for item 1, pay the entire assessment at time of substantial completion as determined by the treasurer?
What if we just make it simple and say upon substantial completion and receipt of invoice? Or
Receipt of
complete
invoice is the
Complete of
key
the
word.
projects and receipt of invoice.
Now, Mark, when you send an invoice for these SADs in the past, how many days did they get to pay?
How many days did they get to pay?
What did it say on the invoice? Is due by what date? How many, 10 days after the invoice, 30 days?
I don't remember they were all basically the same, because the key milestone is that these can only go on the winter tax bill. So
Right.
they can only go on the December tax bill. So in an ideal world, this project would be completed sometime in the summer. you send out the invoice.
In
and then you
November.
say, well,
Or
send out-
earlier.
Send it out earlier, right? But I basically, now, it's coming back to me now. What I said is, here's the invoice. If I have not received payment by November 15th, right? Because I got to get the
You got
tax
to
bills
prepare the
out,
tax bills.
right? So if I have not received payment in full by November 15th, it will go on your tax bill.
How do you know then which option they're going to select?
That's a good point, because the one was either a yes or no. When I sent them the letter, it was either pay me or it'll go on the tax bill. So I'll have to redo the letter with some response required from them as to which financing option they're taking.
And if they don't respond, you assume it's A, B, or C?
I'll probably have to put some type of default into the letter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like you said, no penalty for paying early. And even if you pick number 3, you pay it in 5, okay, fine, you're done.
Okay.
Most of the time, the payment early will come if they're selling the home.
Just pay it off.
Okay, I've made all the changes. I've written them in. I will provide those to Kevin before the end of the meeting, and I'll be available for any questions that you might have. Kevin?
The other minor modification that I made.
Oh, okay.
It would be in section I. At the end of the first sentence, I deleted the words "and estimated per parcel cost listed thereon." The reason for the deletion is that the estimated cost per parcel cannot be determined until the hearing on the apportionment of the assessment.
Is this item I?
It's in part I. It would have been the last.
Second paragraph or first?
First
Even, yeah.
paragraph, first sentence.
After informational meeting number 2, the homeowners association or project champion must circulate a second final petition with the estimated total cost.
Okay, what was in there after estimated total cost previously was "and estimated per parcel cost listed thereon."
Well, it's
Yeah.
not in here.
Yeah, I deleted it.
Oh,
This is a
Because you
clean
deleted
copy. I deleted that because
All
the
right.
estimated cost per parcel cannot be determined until the hearing of the apportionment.
got it. I thought that was a change that you made on the fly, so, okay. All right, any other comments or questions from the board?
So you're going to read these changes to us on the back, or we're not going to vote on this now?
I would like to.
Oh, so you're going to read out what the payment agreements are?
Well, I've been writing the notes down, so what we're going to do is the motion will say as amended.
Well, I'd like you to read out what the amendment's going to be for the payments.
Okay, so
Because I'm
I'll,
confused
well, it's fine.
exactly what you're going to say for
Okay.
number 1.
So let me start again with Mark's change. It'll read, the property owners will be offered 3 options for payment of their apportioned cost. Number 1, pay the entire assessment at time of substantial completion and receipt of invoice. Number 2, pay the assessment over 5 years at the current federal prime rate of interest plus 2%. Number 3, pay the assessment over 10 years at the current federal prime rate of interest plus 4%. And then we'll put some language in not to, for either one, for both items 2 and 3, not to exceed 8%.
All right, so hate to bring up more issues. How are you going to define current for the people? What does current mean? It's going to be the date of, we have to put down what current is. Is it on the date of the invoice? Probably, right? Is it, or let's think about it, okay? So that there's no gray area and no one is arguing with us or complaining that we didn't tell them.
Yeah,
Well,
today,
my intent in putting this in section R is because it would be the date that the public hearing of assessment was held.
Then we better say that. Is that, let's think about it. The date of the public hearing could be 6 months to a year before the money's due. So I think you're taking a chance by picking that date. I think you need to have it closer to the, I don't know, but there, I think you're taking a chance.
But we're saying at the time.
We got to
of the
discuss it.
invoice,
Let's discuss it.
though, Right? We're saying at the time of the invoice.
That's maybe a good idea versus the time of the hearing, which would be 6 months to a year ahead of time.
So that's how Kurt read that last one that said at the time of the substantial closing plus the invoice, receipt of the invoice.
Pay
So
the
we're
ass-
clear,
pay-
and Mark has already sent it out, so we're faith.
Pay the assessment over 5 years at the current federal prime rate of interest plus 2% at the time of substantial completion and receipt of invoice?
No, what I would do where it says current, put a parenthesis and define current to make it really clear. What is current?
What is current? What do you want? What would you recommend?
That's what I want to talk about it.
The
I
date
would
of-
definitely not recommend the date of the hearing.
No, the
Because
date
it's
of
too far in
invoice,
advance.
the date of invoice, that does make more sense than the date of the hearing. I agree.
So then put in
Current as of the date,
current parenthesis, date of invoice. Then
or current as of the date.
I like that.
make it simple and clear.
Date of invoice.
All right, that's fine.
Well, if you got a better idea, let's hear it. We might as well do it right because you know that somebody will nitpick this from now till kingdom come, especially if they're angry about the assessment.
They will?
Pay the assessment over 5 years at the current federal prime rate of interest plus 2% at date of invoice.
No, I think we want to
No,
get rid of that
Rate to be
current.
determined on date of invoice.
Date of invoice.
Okay.
So pay the assessment over 5 years at the federal prime rate of interest plus 2 to be calculated at the date of invoice.
Now, make sure that whatever we do modifies the prime rate or current. Got to make sure that the modifier is that.
I like the current, yeah.
So the way you set it up, it's absolutely clear that the interest rate you're talking about is on this specific date, whatever it
You
is.
want to remove the word current?
Okay, something to
Pay
make
the
it.
That's a
assessment,
good catch. I like
pay
it.
the
I like
assessment
it.
over 5 years at the federal prime rate of interest rate, at the federal prime rate of interest
On the date of the invoice?
to be
In
determined.
effect on the date of the
in
invoice or
effect-
something?
And in effect at date of invoice? I like that.
In effect, that, yeah, that's good.
And you just hope you don't get unlucky and it's not a day like today.
Yeah, that'd be wild. Pay the assessment over 5 years at the federal prime rate of interest in effect at date of invoice plus 2%, and then this, it would be repeated for the second sentence as well. Okay, that's good. Okay, any other questions or comments on this? Anybody in the public want to tangle with us on this one? Please don't. All right, I am looking for a motion.
Mr. Supervisor.
Mr. Heitman.
I move the Board of Trustees approve Resolution 2020-03-03-26, authorizing various updates as amended to the Township Special Assessment District, SAD policies and procedures,
As amended?
Second.
as amended.
Okay. Motion made by trustee Heitman, seconded by trustee Kermy. Mr. Clerk, please take the roll.
Excuse me. Again.
Take your time.
Supervisor Heisey.
Yes.
Trustee Dorshevitz.
Yep.
Trustee Heitman.
Yes.
Treasurer Clinton.
Yes.
Trustee Kermy.
Yes.
Borba, yes.
All right, thank you, everybody. Item F3 is Park Rules and Regulations Update. We discussed this at our meeting last week. Two of the major changes, there were some minor cleanup stuff, but I did make the point of making sure it says Township Supervisor or Designee, wherever that was pertinent. I added a whole new section called, it's on page 7. It's section 30, Other Motorized Equipment, Devices, and Toys. I wrote that up myself, so have at it. And then upon advice of our attorney, we are removing drones from this as they are allowed by state law. So item 29 would read, aerial devices and fireworks, the use or flight of rockets, fireworks, exploding devices, or other aerial device, example, model planes or helicopters, and there are things like that that exist, are strictly prohibited. And those were the major changes. Nothing else was really substantive. We just found a few more typos here and there and cleaned up some of the other recommendations from the last meeting. So I'm assuming that you've all had a chance to look this over. If you had any questions for me, please share them now, but I'd like to get this moving. Any questions by the board? Anybody in the public? Hearing no objections, I am looking for a motion.
Mr. Supervisor,
Mr. Clerk.
I move that the Board of Trustees approve Resolution 2023-03-27, authorizing the updated park rules and regulations for all Plymouth Township parks.
Motion is made by Clerk Vorba. Is there a second? Second by Trustee Heitman. Mr. Clerk, please take the roll.
Clerk Vorba, yes. Trustee Kermy.
Yes.
Treasurer Clinton.
Yes.
Trustee Heitman.
Yes.
Trustee Dorshevitz.
Yep.
Supervisor Heisey.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Next is item F4. This is a contract with American Legal Publishing Company for codification services. I don't want to reread my cover memo there, but our code of ordinances has not been updated in a long, long time. I don't know when it was last done. I think it's at least 8 years.
Yeah, Bridgman was clerk.
Yeah, I don't think it was done by the former clerk either. So we have a hodgepodge of ordinances that have been adopted over the last 8 years, and they're not properly codified. They're not in the code book. They're basically just documents that have been stuffed in there over the years. That is no way to run a railroad. And furthermore, our online ordinance book has not been updated either, and we don't know how to do it. Whoever was managing that in the past, that contract is either expired or we have no authorization to make those changes. And I'm not, and I can tell you from past experience, we're not allowed to make those changes. They have to be done by somebody who is knowledgeable in the art of ordinance and statutory codification, who can make the necessary updates and changes and recalibrate everything and get everything back in a proper order, make sure that it's in the right section and chapter and verse and all that. So we have just not done that, and I've been personally baffled by it because I'm used to dealing with a hard copy ordinance book that is typically updated, at least 2 or 3 times a year. I think it's also an acute problem in the police department because we've changed several of our criminal procedures over the last 3 years, I know, and I think they're just operating off of resolutions and pieces of paper, and that's just, it's not a very modern, efficient way of doing it.
What's happening as we're going through ordinance officers as well? Do they know all these little pieces of parts that we've got flying around?
The only substantial change that I think we've made to ordinance enforcement was the trailer, storage of trailers on the street. I don't think we've done anything else major that's jumping into my mind. But the 4 years prior to us, I don't know what was done, and I think typically the ordinance officer has to be trained on all of these things, and he or she has to bring themselves up to date on it. There's no viable, accessible resource for these individuals to tap into that is current and updated. So the firm that we're looking to hire, this is a professional service, so I don't think I needed to bring this to the board, but I wanted to make sure that you were fully aware of what we were up to. And then Mr. Bennett will also be working with these individuals over a roughly 6-month period as we update the ordinances, and then from here on out, we'll be able to just update it as it goes along.
So will they provide a printed book as well?
Yes, yeah.
What budget line is this coming out of, and is it currently unbudgeted?
It is, I believe it's currently unbudgeted, but it is coming out of printing and publishing, and
So that's the clerk's office?
Ginger is here to, I don't know if Ginger
No,
knows
that's
that.
101-290 is the general operating fund.
General, is that the right place for this versus clerk's office, or I don't?
I mean, it's still, that all rolls up to the general fund.
All right, and the clerk's office is the primary internal source of contact for ordinances. And who is your person that is going to be helping so that we make this efficient and not error-prone?
Yeah, that is correct. And American Legal Publishing has been contacting me over the past couple of years for this purpose. And I remember mentioning a few months back about recodification that needed to occur. I did it about 6 months ago.
So who's your person going to be, or is it going to be you personally?
It'd be me. I'll be working with Bennett and supervisor.
I did call 2 of these references, and they both confirmed that American Legal Publishing did what they said they were going to do, and they were a very, very good firm.
They are the preeminent ones that do this kind of work.
Okay, ready for a motion?
Okay, I'm ready for a motion.
I move that the Board of Trustees approve Resolution 2020-03-03-28, approving a contract with American Legal Publishing for codification services in the amount not to exceed $10,500 and to amount the fiscal year 2020 adopted budget by authorizing the Finance Director to appropriate to the General Fund's fund balance to the Township General Operating Printing and Publishing 101-290-901.000, account of the same, and by authorizing the supervisor and clerk to sign same.
Motion's been made by
Second.
Trustee Dorchevitz, seconded by Trustee Kermy. Mr. Clerk, please take the roll.
Trustee Dorchevitz.
Yep.
Trustee Heitman. Yes. Treasurer Clinton.
Yes.
Trustee Kermy.
Yes.
Clerk Borba, yes. Supervisor Heisler.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much. Item F5 is 2020 Water and Sewer Budget. Ginger Moriarty. I would turn your attention to the handout that has been provided to you tonight, because there are some changes that have been made since the agenda was put together last Thursday.
That's the stapled
Yes.
landscape.
Yep. Whatever works.
Okay. Toby?
No,
okay,
that
Toby.
doesn't work. You got to use the handheld.
Okay, sorry.
Hi.
So when you arrived this evening, I had handed out a revised budget packet for you. My apologies, as I had discovered as I was reviewing it late last night for tonight's meeting, that I had omitted some items in a different column from the department request, and I corrected that today. The item I did not include on the last report that you received was the depreciation expense for the capital assets that the department owns and the intergovernmental services. So those were two major items. While you're looking at your packet, if you just want to flip to the very last page, it's page 14.
So this page 14 supersedes what was in the board packet?
Correct. So what I want to point out here to you is that for fiscal year 2020, the expected or requested budget for the revenue is $14,691,700. And the requested fiscal year 2020 expenditures or uses of financial sources is $12,728,700 with an expected surplus of $1.9 million.
1.963 on the far right.
Correct. $1,963,000. What's important to understand here is that from fiscal year 19 to fiscal year 20, the fiscal year 19 amended expenditures last year was $12,535,400. That's an increase of $193,300 over last year's budgeted request, or 1.54%. This includes the contractual capital outlay projects that are being requested by the department for water and sewer main rehabilitations and manhole projects. This also includes a request for capital equipment for a dump truck of $150 and consulting engineering of $60,000. This also includes the anticipated increase to the water rate of 3.5%. That's been included as part of the water budget for the revenue and the expenditures, with a reduction that we're seeing in the WATUA charges for our sewer.
So
I'm having a hard time.
I don't understand. How was it we went from 13.8 million, 13 million, down to 9.162 million?
Which sheet are you looking
So
at?
17, we were 13.8, 18, we were 13 even, and then 19, we dropped down to 9.1 million in the expenditures, or 10.5 is
Okay, so
projected.
let's talk about the columns. The first column is 2017's actual experience.
Right,
So you had $13.8 million in expenses.
right.
That also included the SAW grant.
Oh,
2 million for SAW grant, approximately.
I think it was 1.2 or something like that.
okay.
Patrick could probably better speak to that than I can on his department. The 2018, 13 million, that reflects actual expenditures. That also included some saw grant activity. I think the expenditures that year was just under 700,000.
It says it was 900, about 900,000 in 2018 for the saw grant.
That was for the revenue, and then the expenditures were like 689 or something without flipping to the page.
But the SAW grant is revenue, right?
So the saw grant is now completed, so there's no expenditures in the 2019 budget.
So the SAW grant was reflected
It's 17
as
to 18.
revenue in 17, but expense in 18,
There was revenue and expenditures in 17 and 18 for the saw grant.
in both.
And then there was some recapture of revenue reimbursement for the saw grant in 19, which should have really been reflected probably in the 18 budget to go with those expenditures. There's probably a delay in the reimbursement.
Reimbursement from the grant?
Yeah. Then when you look at the next column for 2019, you see 2019 activity. That's year-to-date as of 12/31/19. Please keep in mind that we are still in our audit process and completing final journal entries. So the last water sewer bill, I believe, that just went out was for December, January, February, that they're billing in March. So we still have to accrue that revenue back to fiscal year 19 for the month of December.
But the delta, or the net for 19 is 4.2 million. In 17 and 18, though, the SAW grant would have canceled itself out because it would have been, it's in both the revenue and the expense column.
Well, if you look at the revenue on page 1, I'm sorry, it's on page 2. On page 2, third line from the bottom, the SAW grant revenue in 2017 was just under 1.2 million. And in 2018, you realize 684. And then the residual of that balance you see showing up in 2019 is revenue of 194.
All right.
Now, if you go to the expenditures for the SAW grant, let's see which page it's on.
Yeah, I can't find it either. Page 8.
Did you find it? Page
SAW
8?
grant expense, here it is. 1.19, so it basically canceled out. and
Right, so you received
895.
1.1 versus 1.19, that you received revenue of 684 or 689 off the first page versus the expenditures of 895. And then in 2019, you saw no expenditures. So there are no expenditures included in 19 or 20.
Yeah, I guess where my question was going was that in 19, I mean, we dropped a lot of money to the bottom line there. You know, we've
Okay,
increased
so-
our fund balance significantly, right?
Ginger, I think what we may be missing in 2019 is that change in investment in Watua. That's about $1.2 million. And when I'm looking in 2017 and 2018, that shows up as a line item in the expenses, but it hasn't been put there yet in 2019. I think that may be one of the things that still has to be done prior to the audit.
What is this again with Watua? We paid off bonds or something else?
It's basically, how does this work? I think it's basically our share of the depreciated assets of Watua. So it's,
So it went, our share became less?
became an expense, right? As their assets depreciated, we have to recognize that depreciation on our books.
Well,
Because
that will be a part of our audit adjustments for fiscal year 19, so that may not yet be
Yeah.
captured as part of the actual activity for this year.
So it's
Yeah,
not
So
but
out.
I think that-
I put a projected in because the projected would help you to see what we're expecting versus what we've realized so far. But again, until we complete all of the financial audit prep that is going to reconcile all of this, it's still just an estimated projection of where we think we're going to end up at the end of fiscal year 19.
Okay, so we won't end up netting out 4.2 million. It'll be somewhat less than that,
I think it'll be in the neighborhood of 1.4 million less
which
than
is
that.
consistent with the previous 2 years.
Right.
Okay, that's where I was, that's where I was trying to get to.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Okay.
So while we're seeing a loss in revenue for the SAW grant where we had the revenues and expenses matched up, the only difference was the little bit of revenue that we saw in 19 that was still being reimbursed from the grant. That was just delayed timing as to when we received those expenses.
Yeah.
So when you're ready for, are you done or are you ready for questions?
Sure, we can start with
All right,
questions.
let's take the simple one. The assumptions for the amount of gallons used is you're using the 3-year average?
Yes. I did the revenue, so I'm going to answer those.
Okay, so you use 17, 18, 19 in the average?
Correct.
And that's the 1,238,000 gallons.
Correct.
All right. What is the cash on hand in the water and sewer account?
The
We've
current
got-
cash
At
on
end of
hand is
December, at the end of
approximately-
December 31.
It's 14.7.
And where, is that a line item in here or not?
No, that would be part of your balance sheet as
Okay.
cash, as an asset.
So 14.7,
It's currently $14,206,514. We have 2.5 in accounts receivable. Those are billings that have been sent out, but the cash has not yet been received.
it's in that 14 million?
That would be an asset. Not yet realized.
Is that in addition to the 14 million?
So once those bills are paid, they'll become cash. So we have 2.5 million in accounts receivables that have been recognized as revenue, but not yet recognized as cash.
Okay.
So that it will not rise to 16 million. It will
Well,
stay.
no, because you have approximately 2.4 also in liabilities. So loan payments, debt service, those types of things. So it should offset. There's also a loan of 1.5 million that was given to the 805 Special Assessment Fund, in which we receive interest payments back on that as
Tell
well.
me about the loan.
So it's how in the past we funded our SADs. We borrowed it from the Water and Sewer Fund.
Okay, so is SAD borrowing
Yeah.
of how many million?
1.5.
1.5.
So
The
in
SA
anticipation of where you're going with this line of questioning, a couple thoughts. And Patrick, you're going to have to refresh my memory on what the number is. But as the result of all the work for the SAW grant, they calculated it's roughly $10 million of work that has to be done over the next 10 years.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, it's less than it's just under $1 million a year for the next 10 years.
For the
I
next
recall
10 years.
that.
So we need, so as a result of this, the 2-year SAW grant that we did where they inspected all of our sewers and blah, 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 and they came up with a capital, basically a suggested capital improvement program over the next 10 years.
It's not
that
a
will-
requirement. It's a suggested.
It's a suggestion, but it's a good suggestion, right? You're spending money on the assets that are most likely to fail and the impact that it would have on those assets if they failed. So the suggestion is that we should be spending $10 million over the next 10 years. Plus, there's a project that's going to be completed in 2021 at Watua, of which our portion of that capital improvement is going to be $1.5 million. So we're up to $11.5 million that we need on hand to fund these capital improvements. One of the things we talked about before Cindy left was we should be taking that money, the $10 million plus the 1.5, and putting that in a reserve account. So all of a sudden, your 14 million that we have on cash all of a sudden becomes 2.5 real fast.
So what was your assumption for the septic tank refunds for 2020? How much did you put in?
8,400.
Is it in here?
I don't think so. We haven't approved the policy yet, so it would have to be an amendment to this budget.
All right, so that's a potential amendment.
Okay.
And the rate, I'm sorry, what'd you do on the rate? What did you think
So
Great
on the
Lakes is going
on
to
the
do?
very first page, you see
Yeah, I see
the
it.
water sales.
Yep,
The current rate that was adopted as of July of 2019 for the water was $5.60 per gallon.
right, but they raise it every year.
The anticipated increase is 20 cents, moving the rate from 5.60 to 5.80 this July.
And that's based on a notice we've gotten from GLA?
Correct.
3.5%. Was it 3.5?
Do we intend to pass it through? Because we haven't passed through in the last 2 years. So we're assuming we're going to pass it through.
That's the assumption in this budget.
All right,
Don't
in this
know yet.
budget.
Yeah.
The next slide, you see the Wautua service charge. That is remaining fixed.
Line, the third line on page 1?
It's, second line, 592-100-408-000, Wautua service charges.
Hold on, okay.
And then the sewer disposal rate was reduced in fiscal year 19 from $5.80, I believe, to $4.60. So you're seeing a decrease in the revenue budget because we'll be realizing the rate of $4.60 per gallon for the entire fiscal year of 20, not just half of the year.
I did it.
Is there anything in here for upgrading water meters, or that's not a significant expense this year?
So this year, project plans that were put together by the director were just over $1 million. There's capital outlay projects for your water mains, Patrick? At a $45,000
Yes, there's several wastewater capital improvement projects per the recommendation of the asset management plan. And we have one water rehab project that's also a capital outlay that's specified in the budget.
So will you summarize what they are?
They're on
Well,
page
they're
12.
listed, actually.
What page?
Page 12.
I think Mr. Kermy had a question about the meter replacement project, which I believe was ongoing. Is that still the case?
Yes, it's the meter conversion project is always an annual work for our staff. We do as much as we can. We didn't do as much as we wanted to internally last year, and that's just the nature of other projects, other priorities going on with the staff. This year, we did reduce that budget to a more realistic amount based on our work output. And the intent was to emphasize really my goal this year was to explore more on the feasibility of
Automated
AMI,
reading?
correct, automatic metering infrastructure. So hopefully we can do a propagation study this year to determine the feasibility and the cost of implementing something like that. And then if that becomes feasible in a project, that would entail full meter conversion. So.
Well, if we do go down that route, that is ultimately, I believe, a board decision, and I would want a private contractor to do that. I would not want our own people
No,
doing that.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
and propagation study is under the consultant engineering budget item in this budget.
Okay.
What was the word used? What kind of study?
Propagation study.
Propagation study.
Correct.
Sounds like something you grow. Would you give me a summary of what you're doing for the Northville pressure reduction valve and what some of the details for the Country Acres pumping station projects, which are the two biggest ones?
Correct. So the easy one, the wastewater, the Country Acres pump station, that came out of the asset management plan recommendation from the SAW grant. That's just based on the condition of the pumps in that station.
So what are you doing?
So we have a
Rebuilding or-
replacement. We have a replacement of pump number 3, a generator. We have some roof shingles, drain guard, exhaust fan, installation of heater, backflow preventer. So there's quite a bit of rehab items that are in. Right now, the items are in poor condition, and they have a high probability of failure, high consequence of failure. So they pose a high risk, and they're cited in the plan is to get something done now on that station.
So you have a timeline for this and a contractor selected?
It was, so the condition and all the upfront information was passed to Spalding DeDecker, and Jeremy is taking the lead on.
So maybe, Jeremy, you can tell us some details, because if this fails, you have flooded basements, so that's why I'm concerned. I just want to know what our timeline is and what we're doing.
Sure, yeah, I just got the documentation from Patrick about a couple weeks ago, so we're kicking off, I think, next week or the week after, and getting into the details and starting to work out the plans and go from there.
So what date do you think you're going to have it completed? Before the end of the year or sometime in this calendar year?
Yeah, the intent
next
is,
calendar year.
No, the intent is to get the design documentation this year with a bid out this year yet. So I think the intent is fall, winter construction.
All right, this is all indoor, so you can do it in the winter.
Correct.
All right, good. And the PRV, what are you doing there?
So the the pressure reducing station at Northville Road, this is on our water system now. Those 8-inch pressure reducing valves need to be completely replaced. They're well beyond their useful life. They've never been replaced. They've been in there for, the useful life of these PRVs are around 50 years. So I don't know. I think those were installed back in the 60s maybe. And so they've never been replaced. And they've been causing us issues for the past couple of years now where it's to the point where we're being constantly called out during the summertime, during high demand season, where we have to go into the station, adjust them, unstuck them. So this is by far all the PRVs are old, and this one is the one that needs to be replaced sooner rather than later. So.
What company has the contract?
Well, I had, last year I had Hubble, Roth & Clark do the assessment for us because they've worked on a lot of our water system in recent years in regard to the booster station, the water model, and the improvements to the tank. So they're quite familiar with the water infrastructure. So they did an assessment. I have an entire assessment of that building. And so their next step would be to put together a proposal and a bid.
So you're
to bring
not
to the
going
board
to do
at
it
a
during
later
peak
time.
water use season? You're going to wait till the fall?
Yeah, it's very important. Yeah, so this year it's going to be mostly getting everything, the bids, and get the costs, and hopefully bring it back in the fall for the board consideration.
All right. It'd be great if we occasionally get status reports on these capital projects, just so we know they're going on and keep tabs on it. So I know you guys are doing it, but it's always good to have management oversight. All right?
I think just to refresh people's memory, as this SAW grant work was going on over the period of 18 months, I got to participate in a number of the checkpoint status meetings. I'm not easily impressed, but I was extremely impressed with the methodology and the work that this firm that did the analysis compiled. I mean, if you know, it's like that CityWorks project that we saw on the screen a few weeks ago. They have broken down every single line within the sewer system and coded it, and they physically inspected them, and then they went through this methodology where not only what's the risk of failure, but what's the impact if it failed. For example, if you're pumping water to a hospital, right, that's huge impact. And they went through this methodology, and after all is said and done, every single thing was laid out on a spreadsheet in terms of the timing of when it had to be done and how much it was going to cost. So this is step one of implementing that plan. The ones that are being done initially, you know, for the first part of 10 years are the most critical because they're going to fail and they're going to be high impact if they fail. So we're tackling those most critical ones first. In the grand scheme of things, when they got all done, $10 million over 10 years is not that significant. At the end of the day, we have a relatively new infrastructure, and it's in pretty good shape. But we do have to address these things, is my point. I feel very confident in the work and in the outcome of that study.
One last item, GLA and generators at their pump stations. Remember the huge failure in 2003, August, where they didn't have any generators? Who is checking to confirm that they're functioning? Remember, I asked this question back then. Everybody said, oh, everything's fine. But as it turns out, they never installed the generators.
Yeah, we not only lost power, but we lost water.
Right. So, but everybody said, no problem, we have generators in place. But as it turns out, no one ever checked. And at that time, Detroit Water and Sewer never did the work.
There's a shock.
Well, the work was supposed to have been done for Y2K, but it didn't get done, and it wasn't even done in 2003.
I know the chairman of the Great Lakes Water Authority is our former trustee, Abe Mumfa. So
Great.
Is he? I didn't
maybe
know
we should,
that.
yeah. So maybe we should reach out to him, find out. But Patrick, you can find that out for us.
Yes.
Okay, any other questions from the board? Anybody in the public? That's great. I'm looking for a motion. Mr. Heitman?
I move the Plymouth Charter Township hereby approve Resolution 2020-030329 to authorize and adopt the fiscal year 2020 budget for the Plymouth Township Water and Sewer Fund.
Motion made by trustee Heitman. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by trustee Kermy. Mr. Clerk, please take the roll.
Trustee Kermy.
Yes.
Clerk Borba, yes. Treasurer Clinton.
Yes.
Trustee Dorshevitz.
Yeah.
Trustee Heitman.
Yes.
Supervisor Heisey.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Thank you, Ginger.
Thank
Next is item F6, Andover Business Park Storm Drain Agreement. Jeremy?
This is a storm drain agreement for Phase 2 of the Andover Business Park, which is on 5 Mile, just east of Beck. It's 2 additional business condos. I think there's like 14 units there. It's an addition of storm sewer and an underground storm detention system that releases out into the wetlands just behind the buildings.
Okay. Any questions for Jeremy on this item?
You ready?
What?
You ready for a motion?
Yep, sure.
Move to adopt Resolution 2020-03-03-30, authorizing the Township Supervisor to sign the Wayne County Permit M-49526 and approve the storm drain agreement with Hillside Andover 2 LLC and authorize the Township Supervisor and Clerk to execute same.
Motion's made by trustee Kermy. Is there a second? Second by trustee Heitman. Mr. Clerk, please take the roll.
Trustee Heitman.
Yes.
Clerk Borba, yes. Treasurer Clinton.
Yes.
Trustee Kermy.
Yes.
Trustee Dorshevitz.
Yes.
Supervisor Heisey.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Next is item F7, Andover Business Park 2 Water Main Agreement. Easement, sorry.
This is the water main extension for the 2 water services for the building, as well as a additional fire hydrant.
Any comments or questions by the board or the public? I'm also looking for a motion on this item.
Mr. Supervisor,
Mr. Heitman.
I move to adopt Resolution 2020-03-03-31, authorizing the Township Clerk, Township Attorney, and Township Engineer to sign the water main easement for Andover Business Park 2 and to authorize the recording of same.
Motion's made by trustee Heitman. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by clerk Borba. Mr. Clerk, please take the roll.
Clerk Borba, yes. Treasurer Clinton.
Yes.
Trustee Kermy.
Yes.
Trustee Dorshevitz.
Yes.
Supervisor Heisey.
Yes.
Trustee Heitman.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Very good. Thank you very much. Yeah, I made a mistake at the beginning of the meeting. I usually have public comment at the beginning of the meeting, and I'm going to blame the League of Women Voters folks because they're not here to defend themselves, number one. But I think we just lapsed right into that because they were members of the public doing a presentation. So I apologize for not having the public comments at the beginning. We do have public comment available right after we're done with supervisor and trustee comments, though. So,
On the agenda, so you're off the hook.
no, it is on the agenda, isn't it? It is. It's right at the bottom of page 2. Yeah, it got by me. Just a couple things. We will not be meeting again until March 24th. There will be no meeting on March 10th due to the presidential primary. And I was also informed today that in the Michigan legislature, the regional transit tax bills have both been sent to the Government Ops Committee, which is where bills go to die. So I do not think that there will be any regional transit tax law enacted this year, which means no millage on our November ballot for RTA.
The news said it was 3 mills that they were authorizing.
You could go up to 3 mills.
Because at one time, the first proposal was 5.
The first proposal was up to 5, and then the compromise bill was up to 3, but eventually both of them just died for lack of support. There wasn't even a vote taken, so
I mean, it didn't get out of committee?
it didn't get out of caucus. So basically, it went to the speaker, and then he just on his own motion sent them to government ops, which is typically a graveyard. So that was, I'm just presenting that as information only. Otherwise, I have nothing else. Mr. Dorchevitz?
Nothing.
Gary?
I have been asked by one of our Plymouth businesses, Cyberforce Q, to ask our public they're hiring 18 team members, cybersecurity analysts and engineers, both experienced and novice. So in the past, they have hired high school kids with a penchant for computer security, as well as recent college grads. And they're a 24/7 organization, so they work with everybody to fit their schedules in. They are at 47911 Halyard Drive. And again, it's Cyberforce Q, 18 new hires. They've done a tremendous job. They bought the Helm building, and they're filling it up. And it's a great Plymouth Township business.
What are their starting salaries?
It's commensurate upon experience,
Okay.
I believe. They, like I said, they've taken a couple of kids right out of high school that were cybersecurity guys that they trained them, and they're doing very, very well. So just wanted to pass that along.
It's a great business to be in right now. Jerry?
As you know, the election is moving along. We're just one week away, and we've issued about 4,600 absentee ballots. In 2016, that was like 3,300. We've received about 2,300 of them back. So there's going to be I expect a big rush of ballots to be returned here in the next week, now that the elections for Super Tuesday is coming to a close here in a few moments.
What was the split, do you know offhand?
It's just this past week and a half has gone to about 51.5% Democrat. The remainder is about 48.5 Republican at this time.
Are any taking the
As I had suspected, some people were thinking they could take that and they wouldn't have to disclose how they were voting. So they're coming back in and saying, wait, there's no people on this. And so we're having to reissue some ballots. And the past 2 days, we've had to issue about 40 or so ballots for people who have saw that people have dropped out of the race. So I expect that trend to continue over the next few days also.
Because did they reprint the ballots, or
No.
the people that dropped out before they printed the ballots?
Yeah, the ballots were set in place in December.
Yeah.
And so you had a whole host of a dozen people on there. So now that there's virtually 5 people out of the dozen or so, we're getting people coming in now and asking to spoil their ballots.
Voters are asking for a redo?
Yes.
Oh,
It is very labor
I see.
intensive, and it's taking up a good portion of our
every
time.
state is doing the same thing?
I see what you're saying. They want to revote because
Yeah.
their candidate dropped.
Yeah, we have to spoil that ballot, reissue a new one, and it's labor intensive.
And especially in Michigan, with no reason absentee voting now, you had a lot of people who just were eager to vote for their guy or gal, and now they're out of the race, and now they're coming back for a do-over.
And we are, registering new voters each day. So I have new people coming in, and they're getting an opportunity
So
to
you're
vote.
open on Saturday?
And we're open on Saturday from 8 to 4. That's a statute. So we will be here doing the same thing.
Awesome.
And I
Great
have
job.
officially dropped out of the race, in case you're wondering.
You heard it here first.
Yeah. Okay, Mark?
Well, as Jerry's winding up, I'm glad to see it. We're winding down. We've finished another very successful tax season. We sent out roughly $72 million of bills, and we collected all but about 800,000. So, and there's still just a little bit still trickling in because we have to honor the postmarks. Anything that comes in this week with a March 2nd postmark, we'll do that. But right now we're at a 98.6% collection rate. So pretty successful, pretty uneventful tax season. So I'll see you next summer.
For residential than commercial industrial? In other words, people that don't pay tend to be commercial and residential?
No, I wouldn't say that. I would say it's the opposite. I mean, businesses are making sure that they're paying their real property tax. So the ones that aren't paying are normally the residents.
Okay.
Everything, well, thank you very much. Great job. Chuck?
One quick one for the public safety. With the major rebuild of 275 between 6 Mile and Ford Road, do you have or need a special plan for emergency vehicles and coverage? Since some of the interchanges will be closed, have you made it yet, or if it is done?
We have not made it yet. We're still looking at the options from MDOT and what they plan to do and when they plan to do it.
You mean MDOT will be talking to you?
Yeah. Yeah, they advised us of their meeting that they had last month of the plan, and as things progress, we will look at it and change it.
So it may start in a month or less, right?
Okay. Anybody in the public? Need a motion to adjourn?
Mr. Supervisor.
Mr. Heitman?
I move we adjourn at 8:22 p.m.
Motion's made by trustee Heitman. Is there a second? Second by clerk Bover. All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye. Aye. We are adjourned.